Bright day, everyone. This is the report of Group 3.
What is agrarian reform? Agrarian reform is the redistribution of land to landless farmers and farm workers, including support services to improve their economic status. It may involve alternatives like profit sharing, labor administration, and stock distribution, ensuring beneficiaries receive a fair share of the lands produced. And also, the term agrarian comes from the Latin word ager, meaning fell, and refers to land ownership or division. Reform implies the need for correction of existing defects. So let's proceed to agrarian reform policies during the pre-Spanish era. But before that, I try to explain of this quote, "This land is ours. God gave this land to us." So it means that the people who live in the Philippines before the Spanish arrived lived. They had a right to the land because God gave it to them. What is private ownership? Private ownership is unknown to almost all the Filipinos returning the Philippines, and the system of communal ownership is enjoyed by many in terms of land ownership. The absence of record will indicate this. However, there is no denial as the land patterns that the Philippines do have to it. First, those who engaged in shifting cultivation regarded all land as their public domain, although they did not choose to cultivate all of the available land. For example, a group of people living in the forest declare a small area to grow crops, but after a few years, they move to a new spot. They believe all the land is for everyone to use, not owned by anyone in particular. Second, those who practice a type of living in an area for a long period of time follows private ownership. However, no formalized procedure for recognizing private ownership was ever introduced. For example, a family has lived on a piece of land for generations. They feel like it's their land, but there is no official document to prove it. Everyone in the village knows that their land, but it's not written down anywhere. Lastly, the pre-Spanish classes who live in the community determine the land ownership system. For example, in a village, the elders and leaders decide who gets to use different parts of the land. They might give some land to the families, some to the village for farming, and some to the community for special events. With regards to land ownership practices, distinction is to be made as to three types of individuals living during this time. First, nobles were free from the payment of tribute and can possible own lands. Second, free people were entitled to cultivate land but is required to pay annual fee or one half of the payout of their crops to the dato. Lastly, the dependents who can never hold lands as they are regarded to serve only the dato. During the Spanish period, 1521 to 1898, the arrival of Magellan and Legazpi in the Philippines transformed land ownership, shifting from communal practices to a system where public land were recognized as part of the public domain, disregarding local customs. While citizens cultivate tax-free land, communal areas remained for community use. The abusive encomienda system forced farmers to sell their goods at low prices to encomenderos, who profited from reselling and declared them to provide additional services. This system evolved into the hacienda system in the early 19th century. Despite royal decrees encouraging landowners to secure legal titles, many peasant farmers struggled to comply and became tenants on their own land, facing injustices like low land prices and large grants to price. These grievances fueled growing frustration among peasants, culminating in the 1898 Philippine Revolution. American rule in 1898 to 1935. The end of Spanish rule transitioned the Philippines to American colonial governance under the Treaty of Paris, complicating land issues due to loose records. The Philippine Commission introduced several policies, including the Philippine Bill of 1902, which allowed private individuals to own up to 16 hectares and corporations up to 1,024 hectares. Act number 496, which implemented the torrent system of land registration, and the Homestead Program of 1903, enabling tenants to acquire farms of at least 16 hectares, primarily in northern Luzon and Mindanao. However, many farmers did not engage with these programs, and fundamental issues of landiness persisted, resulting in increased tenancy and reduced land ownership among Filipinos. Although Friars' land were disposed of by 1919, Friars remained significant landholders by 1977. The American administration favored wealthy hacienderos prioritizing their interest in raw materials over fair land distribution, which further exploited peasants while boosting agriculture production. So let's proceed to Commonwealth era in 1935 to 1946. During this era, the Rice Tenancy Act of 1933 was implemented to regulate shared tenancy contracts, aiming for a better landlord-tenant relationship with a 50-50 crop sharing and a 10% interest cap per agricultural year. However, its effectiveness was hindered by the requirement for municipal councils to petition for implementation, which never occurred. President Manuel Quezon later mandated its application in Central Luzon, but contracts were limited to 1 year, allowing landowners to unjustly dismiss tenants by not renewing contracts. And also to support farmers, Quezon established the Nation Rice and Corn Corporation, or NARIC, to provide legal assistance in land rights disputes and continue the Homestead Program through the National Settlement Administration, or NLSA. In response to social unrest, the government was motivated to include social justice provisions in the Constitution. Second Philippine Republic, Japanese occupation in 1941 to 1945. During the Japanese occupation, 1941 to 1945, the Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, or Hukbalahap, emerged, led by Luis Taro. Capitalizing on social unrest after World War II, they established a shadow government in Central Luzon, discrediting the official government and strengthening their connection with the local populace. Third to fifth Philippine Republic, which is Rojas administration in 1946 to 1948. The Rice Tenancy Act of 1933 was proclaimed effective nationwide, yet land tenure issues persisted and worsened despite various remedial measures. One such measure was Republic Act 34 of 1946, known as the Tenant Act, which established a 70 to 30 crop sharing arrangement and further regulated shared tenancy agreements. Quirino administration in 1948 to 1953. With the announcement of his two main objectives, that is, economic reconstruction of the nation and restoration of faith and confidence of the people in the government. None of it speaks of the making of agrarian reform law. And also, he created the Land Settlement Development Corporation to accelerate and expand the resettlement program for peasants. He had little success with the continuance of the programs previously implemented by his predecessor, since social unrest is prevailing and none was done to properly and effectively address the issue. The same led to unpopularity of his administration.
Magsaysay Administration 1953 to 1957. The President introduced two Land bills, the Agricultural Tenancy Act of 1954, Republic Act 1199, and the Land Reform Act of 1955, Republic Act 1400. First, Agricultural Tenancy Act of 1954. This act shifted from shared tenancy to leasehold system, where tenants pay a fixed amount of landlords. It prohibited the eviction of tenants without a court ruling that allowed tenants to receive up to 70% of the crop if they contributed labor until transplanting. Second, the Reform Act of 1955. This act allowed the exploration of private agricultural land over 300 hectares owned by individuals. Despite this effort, both acts and shortcomings, such as exempting land smaller than 144 hectares from subdivision for tenants, the following were established to support the reforms: and Agricultural Tenancy Commission to address tenancy issues, agricultural credit, and cooperative financing. Administration ACCFA to provide warehouse facilities and assist farmer in marketing. Agricultural and individual banks to offer easier terms for applying, and homesteads and farmland. And then the Magsaysay Administration 1953-1957 in the Philippines aimed to address the issue of land reform through the introduction of two key bills: the Agricultural Tenancy Act of 1954, Republic Act 1199, and the Land Reform Act of 1955, Republic Act 1400, reform shift to the shared tenancy system to a leasehold system, while the latter allowed of the expiration of private agricultural land over 300 hectares owned by individuals. Both acts had shortcoming the exemption to support this reform. The following organization. Slide. Garcia Administration 1957 to 1961, the President made the statement regarding agrarian reform resulting in his administration being viewed as a stalemate between landlords and the alias of Congress. Macapagal Administration 1961 to 1965. Under his administration, the Agricultural Land Reform Code of 1963, Republic Act 3844, was introduced, allowing for the purchase of private farmlands to distribute as small lots and landless tenants with easy payment terms. The retention limit for handholding was set as 75 hectares for both individuals and corporation, with some criticized as high given the increasing population density. Within 2 years of implementation, no land was the purchased because peasants were unable to afford it. An adequate budget allocation led to this the being cultivated, resulting in declining productivity among farmers. The Garcia and Macapagal administration in the Philippines had different approaches to agrarian reform. While the Garcia administration would take any action to address the issue, the Macapagal administration introduced the Agricultural Land Reform Code of 1963, Republic Act 3844, which allowed for the purchase of private farmlands and distribution of landless tenants. The code's implementation faced several challenges, including high land prices and peasants could not afford inadequate budget allocation and declining productivity among farmers. Marcos administration during first 4 years, significant challenges in land purchase and distribution occurred, but no new agrarian land is enacted, leading to continued reliance on Republic Act 6389. Amendments were made in response to peasant unrest, including: first, conversion of land residential use of a ground for tenants dismissal. Second, shift from shared tenancy of leasehold. Third, creation of the Department of the Agrarian Reform. Fourth, compensation of tenants if land was converted. Fifth, increased financing of land reform programs. With martial law, his issue PD, 2 designated in the Philippines has a land reform of area of land of the Tenants Exemption Act PD 27 to facilitate the land transfers. The Land Bank of the Philippines was established and incentivized landowners. The policy had loopholes, such as exception for export crop and limitation that favored large landlords. Farmers faced burdensome payments, terms, and inadequate support services. Ultimately, this effort were ineffective, making agrarian reform a key issue for the Aquino government. The Marcos administration in the Philippines implemented several challenges to the country's agrarian reform policies, but the new measure of the legislation was passed during his first 4 years in office. These changes were primarily made in response to peasant unrest, including shifting from shared tenancy to leasehold, creating the Department of Agrarian Reform, and the prevention tenants of land was converted. Martial law was declared and the Emancipation Act (PB 27) was introduced to expedite land transform. This effort faced significant limitations such as exemption for export crop and land affordable condition for farmers, including burdensome payments terms and inadequate support services. Aquino administration 1986 to 1992, upon taking office, she emphasized agrarian reform as a vital program for the economic well-being as a dignity of many Filipinos, making it central of her administration. This led to the comprehensive agrarian reform program for the insurance of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law Republic Act 6657, aimed at promoting social justice and industrialization. Due to the time constraints of the land's distribution, the policy faced criticism and was viewed as some of failure. Ramos' administration 1992 to 1998, he prioritized the rapid implementation of his comprehensive agrarian reform program (CARP) to meet its deadlines, but it lacks sufficient funding to address issue. He signed our Republic Act 8532, which amended the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law (CARL) and extended for the implementation period by another 10 years. Estrada administration 1998 to 2001, the launch of Magkabalikat para kaunlarang aragyo magsasaka aimed to encourage foreign investment in the agricultural sector or advanced crop production technology, however, did not resolve ongoing issues related to agrarian reform. So, the explanation, the Aquino Ramos and Estrada administration in the Philippines all the prioritized agrarian reform with the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, Republic Act 6657 in being a key initiative under Aquino. However, the policy faced the criticism as time to contest hindered land distribution and the funding shortages continue to plug the program under Ramos and Estrada despite effort to extend the implementation deadline. Estrada introduced Magsasaka, a program intended to promote investment and technology in agricultural sector but did not fully address ongoing issues related to agrarian reform. Important terms to understand: land reform is a term commonly used by students, but it has a narrow focus compared to agrarian reform, which emphasizes a broader range of components. Both terms can be used in interchangeability. Agrarian reform refers to a comprehensive measure aimed at improving relationship regarding land use rights and address obstacles to the economic and social development caused by flaws in agrarian structures. Agrarian reform encompasses not only land reform but also the development of complementary institutional frameworks, rural education, and social welfare system. It addresses border issues beyond just the relationship between farmers and land. The Agrarian Reform Program aims to enhance the institution related to farm life and implement measures necessary to the success of tenants, farm workers, and owner cultivators. In the Philippines, the agrarian reform problem has the two important dimensions. First, land agricultural productivity. Second, people, social aspect, and human rights. The understanding the context of the lands reform, the agrarian reform in the Philippines, it is important to recognize that the term at use interchangeability. Agrarian reform has a broader scope encompassing not only land reform but also the development of institutional frameworks, rural education, and social welfare system that address related issues. The Agrarian Reform Program specifically aims to improve land rights and tenants, farm workers, and owner cultivators and enhance their overall well-being within the Philippines. And agrarian reform problem encompasses two key dimensions: land, agricultural productivity, productivity and people's social aspect and human rights. Objective of the Agrarian Reform Program. The Agrarian Reform Program is the integrated plan aimed at addressing low agricultural productivity and poverty among farmers. Its primary goal is to transfer land ownership from landlords to the tillers, ensuring the dignified existence for the small farmer. The program seeks to make this farmer landowner while improving the socio-economic condition around them and increasing their returns for labor. The objectives of the Agrarian Reform Program in the Philippines is multifold. The main goal is to address low agricultural productivity and elevated poverty among farmers. The program aims to transfer land ownership of landlords to the tiller, thereby granting them dignified existence for giving them control over their own land. The program also seeks to improve the socio-economic condition of this farmer and enhance the result for labor, ultimately improving their economic and bettering their standard of living. By achieving these objectives, an agrarian reform program aims to contribute the overall development of the country, agricultural sector, and rural areas.
Importance of agrarian reforms. What are agrarian reforms programs? These programs are designed to change how land is owned and used, especially in agriculture. They aim to create a fairer system for farmers and improve their lives. What are the benefits of these programs? The first one, better lives for farmers. Agrarian reforms help farmers by giving them land to own, land resources to improve their living conditions. This means they have a place to live and work, and they can grow food to feed their families. And the second, farmers become independent. These programs help farmers break free being controlled by landlords or being in debt. They can independent land workers, making their own decisions and contributing to the country's development. And the third one, new opportunities for growth. Agrarian reform can help farmers get the money they need to start new businesses or expand their farms. This creates more jobs and helps the economy grow. And the fourth, a fairer society. By making sure land is distributed more fairly, agrarian reform can reduce inequality and create a more balanced society where everyone has a chance to succeed. Definition of a constitution. A constitution is a set of fundamental principles or precedents that govern a state or organization. It serves as a blueprint for how the entity operates. Especially, the Philippines Constitution is a written document that establishes the fundamental power of the government and how those powers are divided among its branches. Natures of the constitutions, written versus unwritten. The image explains that constitution can be either written or unwritten. That is contained in one document or a set of documents. The Philippines Constitution is an example of a written constitutions. Ang unwritten constitutions, this is a constitution that is not committed into a single document, but is found in various sources such as statutes, judicial decisions, customs, and common law principles. Conventional or cumulative. Conventional constitution, this type of constitution is formally established at a specific time and place by a deliberate body or ruler. Cumulative constitution, this type of constitution evolves over time through gradual changes rather than a planned systematic process. Rigid or flexible. Rigid constitutions, this type of constitution can only be amended through a formal and usually difficult process. Flexible constitution,
This type of constitution can be changed through ordinary legislation, similar to how unwritten constitutions are changed.
Okay, so let's talk about essential parts of a good written constitution. So, a constitution is like the rule book for a country. It's super important because it tells everyone how the government should work and what rights people have. It's like the foundation of a house. If it's not strong, the whole thing could crumble. So there are the three main parts of a good constitution. So number one is a constitution of liberty. So this part is all about protecting people's rights and freedoms. It's like a list of things the government can't do to you. So you're like taking away your freedom of speech or religion. It's super important because it makes sure the government doesn't get too powerful and can do whatever it wants. So, second is constitution of government. So this part set up how the government works. It says who gets to make the laws, like Congress, and who runs the country, like the president, and who makes sure everything is fair, like the courts. It's like the organizational chart of the government, making sure everyone knows their job and how to work together. So third is Constitution of Sovereignty. This part is about how to change the Constitution itself. It's like the rulebook for changing the rulebook. It makes sure that changing the Constitution is a big deal and that everyone has a say in it. So that's important because it keeps the Constitution stable and prevents people from making quick changes that could be bad for the country. So those are the three main parts of a good constitution. So they are all super important because they make sure that the government is fair, that the people's rights are protected, and that the country has a stable foundation. It's like a recipe for a good government. If you follow the recipe, you'll end up with a strong and just country. So now let's talk about the Philippine Constitution. So the Philippines has it had a few different constitutions throughout its history. The first one is the Biak na Bato Constitution. In 1897, was written during the Philippines Revolution. It was modeled after the Cuban Constitution and aimed to establish a government with three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. However, it was short-lived because the revolution was still ongoing. So the Malolos Constitution in 1899 was a more significant document. It was the first constitution in Asia written by a people's representative. It was influenced by the Spanish Constitution of 1812 and Latin American constitutions. It established a popular representative government with distinct executive, legislative, and judicial powers. However, the Malolos Constitution was also short-lived because the United States took control of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. And the Philippines has had several other constitutions since then, each reflecting the country's changing political landscape. It's important to remember that a good constitution is a living document that evolves over time to meet the needs of a changing society. So let's proceed to 1935 Constitution. So the 1935 Constitution was a big deal for the Philippines. It was like a stepping stone towards independence, and it was influenced by a bunch of other constitutions like the American one. It was drafted by a group led by Claro M. Recto, and it made the Philippines a commonwealth, kind of like a practice run for being a fully independent country. It also changed the government from having one house of lawmakers to two, which is called bicameral system. And the 1973 constitution was a bit different. It was supposed to change the government to a parliamentary system where the prime minister is the head of government, but things got complicated. Martial law was declared and the president ended up with more power. The new constitution was ratified in a way that some people thought was unfair, and it was changed a bunch times after that. So the 1935 constitution was like a big step towards independence, while the 1973 constitution was more about changing the balance of power in the government.
The 1987 Constitution. The current Constitution of the Philippines, adopted on February 2, 1987, was drafted by Constitutional Convention led by Rizal Munoz Palma. It established the country as a democratic republican state with three branches: executive, legislative, and judiciary. Key principles include checks and balances and separation of powers, along with three constitutional commissions: Civil Service, Commission on Election, and Commission on Audit. Amendments can be made through Constitutional Assembly Congress, proposed amendments. Constitutional Convention requires a two or third votes from Congress. Lastly, people initiative proposed by public with a petition from at least 12% of voters. Features of 1987 Constitution. In 1987 Constitution consists of 18 articles and is longer than 1935. In 1973 Constitution, it strengthens judicial independence, new appointment provisions, and expanded authority, including political question previously excluded. The Bill of Rights has been significantly enhanced, and creation of a Commission on Human Rights further bolster this protection. Purpose of the Constitution. The Constitution establishes the permanent framework for government, assigning power and duty to various departments and outlining foundational principles for government's operation. Effectivity of the Constitution. The current Philippine Constitution took effect on February 2, 1987, the same day it was ratified and publicized rather than on the date of its formal proclamation. Amendments and revision. Amendments refers to a change that adds, reduces, or deletes without altering the basic principles involved. Generally affect only the specific provision. Revision. This refers to a revision that changes at least one fundamental principle of constitution, such as separation of power or check and balances. A revision also occurs with substantial part of the constitution are altered, impact multiple provisions. There are two tests to determine whether the proposal is a revision or amendment. Quantitative test assesses whether a proposal change is extensive enough with other substance entirely constitution by deleting or modifying many provisions. Qualitative test evaluates whether change will significantly alter the fundamental structure or government, indicating a provision.
Steps in the amendment or revision of the Constitution. 1. Proposal. Article 17, Section 1, 9, 10, 87 Constitution. 2. Submission. 3. Ratification. Proposal may be made by one Congress as a constitutional assembly, acting upon a vote of 3/4 of all its members. 2. Constitutional Convention called for such proposed by a 2/3 vote of all the members of the Congress, or by majority vote of all its members. Congress may submit to the electorate the question of calling such a convention. 3. People's initiative applies only to an amendment, not a revision of the Constitution. A people initiative can only propose amendment to the Constitution in as much as the Constitution itself limit initiatives to amendments as shown by the deliberation of the Constitutional Commission. Initiative. This refers to the people's power to propose constitutional amendments or legislation through election, allowing them to initiate and decide on bills independently of the Legislative Assembly. Referendum. This refers to the electorate's power to approve or reject legislation through a election, including status and local laws that allows the public to adopt or reject measures passed by the legislative body. Two essential elements of initiative. 1. People must author and personally sign the entire proposal. 2. Proposal must be embodied in a petition. Submission of proposal. Submission of piecemeal amendment is unconstitutional. All the amendments must be submitted or ratification at one plebiscite only. The people must be given a proper frame of reference in arriving at their decision. Ratification of proposed changes become valid after ratification by a majority vote in a plebiscite held 60 to 90 days after. Approval by Congress or a constitutional convention. B. Ratification of a sufficient petition by the people by COMELEC. Date of effectivity of the amendment or revision. Amendment or revision take effect on the same day as the ratification, the day the votes are cast unless otherwise specified in the amendment themselves. Judicial review of proposal. Judicial review is a power of court to determine if government actions comply with the Constitution. That being said, the manner is making the proposal is subject to judicial review, not the substance of the proposal, because the Constituent Assembly owes its existence and derives all its authority and power from the Constitution. Thus, whether it has acted according to the Constitution must always be a matter of judicial recognize.